Hello friends, so today we are going to discuss about templated type HTML helpers in MVC. Right, you must be knowing that we have already discussed about built-in HTML helpers in my previous videos about standard and strongly typed HTML helpers. Today's topic is templated HTML helpers. So let's start. So before we start, what we are going to cover in today's topic is that templated HTML helpers, their types of templated HTML helpers, what are the benefits of using these kind of helpers, and how can we generate complete HTML based on the basis of model, right? And how to use templated HTML helpers, and a lot of things we are going to discuss in today's video. Uh, One more thing I want to tell you, how many types of templated HTML helpers do we have in MVC, right? So these are the list as you can see on the screen. These are the types of templated HTML helpers which is available. That is display, display for, then display name for, display text, display for model, right? So in a bit we are going to discuss all these things in the Visual Studio when we are going to implement this, right? And along with that, we also have these kind of input that is called editor, HTML.editor for and model, right? So before we proceed, please like and subscribe my channel so that you can get the latest notification in the future. So let's start without wasting any time. So let's go to the Visual Studio and let's create one new project and let's name it as we are discussing templated. So let's name it templated HTML helpers, right? Clicking on the OK button. I'm choosing the empty one and I'm going to add the references of MVC. So repeating the same step which we used to do in earlier. So let's wait. It will generate the entire structure for the MVC application. It's still in process, so let's wait for a couple of seconds more. Yeah, now it has given the complete structure of MVC application. Now let's add first of all controller. So if you are not aware of the controller, so please watch my previous videos. So I have already uploaded that. So I would recommend you. So please watch that. Now click on the add button. Let's name it home controller. Control is also added. Yes, so controller is also added. And for this controller, we are having this by default index action method. And for this index action method, I'm going to add one new view. So let's uncheck this checkbox, keeping the simple things index. So I'm repeating the same thing of which we did in earlier videos, right? So till now, there is no any difference. Let's delete it. And let's create one model. So inside under the model folder, let's create one class. So whenever I say model, that means I'm discussing about class, right? So let's name it employee class. Any meaningful name we can define over here. So let's click it. Now one simple class has been created for us. So let's define some properties. So to save the time, I have already defined some properties, right? As you can see, and these things I will discuss you after some time, right? So these are some properties which we have defined. That's a very simple normal class. We can see ID, name, email address, is employee, date of birth, right? So these are the properties. Now let's go to the our index view. And as I told you in my last video in the strongly typed HTML helpers, when we want to make any particular view to be strongly typed, so we need to give the reference of of that particular model, right? So on this view, we are going to use this employer model, right? So for using this employer model on this view, we need to give the reference of that employee model, right? So let's give the reference at the rate using name of application dot models, right? And which class we are going to use on this view. So we will use employer model, right? So now we are telling this view that this particular view is now strongly we can say strongly that is tightly coupled with this employer model, right? So we are going to use this employer model on this particular view, right? So now let's let's create one HTML that templated HTML helper that we discuss. So let's start. Firstly, we are going to discuss HTML.display, right? So let's write HTML.display display, and it is expecting the property name, right? Let's save this. And one more thing, inside the controller for this index action method, right? So we are going to use this employer model. So let's give the reference of this employer model. So using templated, the name of the application, right? And over here we can use now this employer model inside this controller, right? So creating the object of this class, and now we are going to define some, and now we are going to assign the values to these employee properties, whatever we have defined the properties in this class, right? So let's do it. So we can assign id. So as id, let's suppose 100. Then we have name. These are the properties you can see, which we have already defined in the employee class, right? So let's define name. You can take it weapon, right? Then we have address. Let's suppose take Delhi. Then we have age. So let's take it 12. Then we have date of birth. So let's define because date of birth is of type date time. So let's take date time, current date time. So it will show the current date time. And now the next one is your email. So let's give any meaningful email ID, right? And the last one is employee. That's a boolean value. So let's assign to, right? So till now we have done the same thing which we used to do in the previous videos, right? So we have created one controller and one model, that is your employee class, and inside that controller we have assigned the values to all the properties of that class, right? So let's save this, and we are going to return this object to this view. And this index action method is basically associated to which view? This index view, right? Because we have created this view for this index action method, right? So by it's giving either on this, okay, new employee object, okay, yeah, let's save this and now go to the index. So just to save the time, I have written these. So let's write it. Okay. So these are the basically types of templated HTML helpers: display name, display name, display name for. Okay. So what it will does, um, when the application will be rendered in the browser, so display name will basically display the name, uh, the the name of that property, right? So what is the property name? We have to find name. So it will simply display the name in the browser. Same it will test for email also, right? And this one is your strongly typed version for your templated HTML helpers, right? So when we want to define in a strongly typed version, so we used to define with it with lambda expression, right? So we have written over here. So let's save this and run. So it will take some time on the first time load. So let's wait for a couple of seconds. Yes, now it is rendering in the browser. So let's wait. It will simply display the these property names, right? Name, email, and date of birth. So let's see. Yes, now it is rendered. As we can see, name, email, and date of birth, right? Whatever we have, we want to display the name of all those properties, right? So, and the last one is your strongly typed version of your this templated HTML helpers, right? And now let's suppose we have such a scenario that we want to display the name not like this. We want to display some space between the date of birth, or we want to display any meaningful message over here. So that also we can achieve. And then the concept come here about attributes, right? So we need to define the attributes on each and every property. These are the properties. So on the top of each and every property, we can define attributes over here, right? So let's suppose for the name, we want to display the name like this. In the square bracket, we used to define that. Okay, for the defining the attributes, we need to mention namespace in MVC. That is your using system dot component model dot data annotation, right? So this is the namespace which is used to implement all type of validation. Let's suppose when we want to apply any validations on the UI. So in that case, we use this data annotation component model namespace, right? So we will be discussing in a very detail in the upcoming video. So no need to worry about that. But as of now, you understand that when we want to display any meaningful title or any meaningful name for any controls on the UI. So we used to define attributes on the top of each and every property. So like for this name property, we are defining, let's suppose name, we are defining, and now let's define, please enter the name, right? Similarly, uh, some spelling mistake. Similarly, we can define, let's suppose on the email property also, please enter the email. Similarly for date of birth, let's do it for the last one. Right, please enter the date of birth. Similarly, you can apply to each and every property whatever you want according to your need in the application, right? So let's save this and now run this application. So now it will display, it will be displaying instead of this name and email, it will be displaying these thing whatever we have mentioned in the top of the properties, right? For name, it will display, please enter the name. So let's wait. So it is loading. Yeah, we can see. So as you can see, for name it is displaying please enter the name. For email, please enter the email, and for date of birth, please enter the date of birth. In the previous one, when we loaded the application, it was simply displaying the name, email, date of birth. But now, after applying the attributes on the property of a class, it is displaying the meaningful name, whatever we want, right? So this way we can define according to our need whatever we want to display on the UI, right? Now let's display the value of each and every property, right? So let's suppose whatever we have defined the properties in this class, and we want to basically show the values of each and every property. So whatever we have defined in this index section method, right? So we have, as of now, we have hard coded this value, but in a normal scenario we used to bring this data from database, right? But to make you understand, I have just hard coded all these values. So now we want to bind all this data on the UI. So for that, we on the index view we can define I have already just to save the time, let's do it. All right, so we have use at the rate HTML dot display text. So basically this HTML helper is basically used to display the text, means it will display the actual value of that particular control, whatever it's going to hold. So for name we have defined weapon, and for the next one is email. So for email it will be displaying this email ID, right? Whatever we have assigned into this employee object, right? And this object we are returning to this view, and to which view it will go, it the view which is associated to this action method is your index action method, right? Sorry, is your index view, right? So let's save this and now run the application. So let's see whether it's going to print the actual value of all those properties. Yes, so we can see for name it is displaying the name and the email, your email ID value, right? So this is the way. And now let's suppose we want to use the strongly typed version for displaying the value of the properties, right? So for that we have display text for, as I have already discussed in the slide. And for this we have some overload method for this parameter. Okay, so in this we need to define the lambda expression, right? We dot whatever we can take, let's suppose, and over here we can take your, let's suppose we want to display date of birth, right? Save this. Now run your application. Let's reload. Now it will, so it will find the data for date of birth also. Yeah, we can see over here. So in the date of birth it is actually showing the current date time, right? Whatever we have binded in this property, right? So this is the way how we can display the meaningful name to all the labels or to all the controls, and how we can bind the data and how we can show the data on the UI, right? So this one is your strongly typed version for this control, right? So let's save this. Now I'm stopping this application. And before we proceed further, one more thing I want to tell you. Let's suppose we want to show the complete data of a model by using a single tag, right? So we want to show this complete data of this model by using a single tag. So that also we can do. So for that we used to do it. We used to define display model, right? Display for model, display model, display for model, basically, right? So by using this single tag, it will it will show the complete data of this employer model, right? So let's save this and run the application. So this is the way how we can bind the data on the UI. So let's wait for a couple of seconds. Yeah, we can see after this one ID, this one your ID, then your ID value, then your name, then name value, then the email, then the value of this email ID, and then the address, then the address of this, then the value of this address, then your this age employee, then the checkbox, then the age, then its value, and then the last one is your date of birth, and then its value, right? So we can see this one is your label, then value, label, value, label, value. So when we inspect this in the browser, we can see over here that display label. This one is your label, then value, then label, then value, right? So similarly, so this is the way how we can, let me stop this. Yeah. So this is the way how we can deal by using the single tag, right? So when there is a need in the application that we want to show the data of data of when we want to show the data of a given model, complete data for the given model. So by using this single tag, we can handle this, right? And now we will discuss about next that we have discussed in the slide, that is your HTML.editor, right? So how we can use this? So for this, let's create one more action method inside the controller, right? So let's create one action method. Okay, I need to stop this application. So let's create one action method, public action result. Let's name it modify or editing, right? Right. And simply we are returning a view, return view, right? And for this index and for this action method editing, we are going to add one view. So let's name it editing. Okay, same. Let's add it. And for this editing view, let's delete this. And for this view, we are going to use the same model as we did for the index on the index view. So on this view also, we are going to use this employee model, right? So for using this, we need to define the reference of that model, right? So using the name of the application is your templated HTML helpers, right? So we need to define then inside that we need to access the models, and inside that model we need to access, okay, the rate model, and we are going to use employee model, right? So now this view is basically is strongly typed with this employee model, right? So now for using this HTML.editor, uh, let's to save the time, I have already written this. So let's write over here, right? And basically, HTML editor is basically used when we want to take input on the UI, right? So in that case, we basically use this HTML editor. So to yeah, so according to our need, I have just for displaying this, I have used display name, and for editor, it will automatically draw the control for this particular label, right? And similarly, take we can define the strongly typed version of this editor, right? Name, and for editor for this, right? So let's save this and let's run this application. So that's a very simple concept, whatever we have discussed right now. It's loading. Now it's going to hit home controller and the editing action method, right? Yeah, so we can see for the ID, for the ID field, for this ID field, it has generated your this input type field. When I'm passing this, you can see integer because the ID is of integer type, right? So automatically it has inserted the control. And for the next, we have taken the name. Name is of string type, so we can type anything, whatever we want, right? And if we inspect this element in the browser, we can see, let's suppose we want to check. So we can see the type of this input control is number, right? And the type of for this control is your text, right? For this, right? So this is the way how we can handle the editor helpers in the MVC application, right? Now let's check for one more control. Let's suppose for date of birth. So let's define, and we are using the strongly typed version of this HTML helper. So we have date of birth, and similarly we can define here date of birth, right? So let's save this and run the application. So now it is going to hit editing action method inside the home controller, right? So let's wait. So it will automatically generate the control for date of birth field also. Yes, we can see for ID and name we have already seen, and for date of birth, it should display the calendar. Okay, but uh, in the HTML, let's see the type of this control. Type of this control we can see over here. This is your date time, right? So date time, but in the HTML, as we know that HTML doesn't support your date time uh, type, right? HTML basically support either date or either time, not date time. So for bringing the calendar over here along with the date time, we have one more way. Just go into the application, we can apply the attribute over here, right? So on the property of the model. So let's go over here, and for date of birth we have we have one more attribute. Let's suppose we can define data type, and then data type dot over here we can define whatever we want, date time, right? So as of now we want, let's suppose, take date, save it, and now run the application again. So on this view, on this editing view, we haven't done anything. It will automatically fetch the type of that control from that model, right? So let's wait. Now it should show the calendar for the date of birth control, right? So these are the different ways how we can handle. Yes, we can see please enter the date of birth, and over here when we click, the calendar is coming for us, right? Whatever the date we want to choose, we can choose from here, right? So these are the ways. Right, now let me stop the application. Let's suppose we want to handle this by using one single tag, right? So for that we can write HTML dot editor for model, right? So what it will does, it will basically, it will automatically generates all the required controls for all the properties whatever we have defined in this class, in this employee model, right? So by writing this editor for model one single line, it will automatically generate all the controls. So let's see. Let me put break tag over here to differentiate it, right? Yeah. Save this. Now I'm running the application. So let's see what it's going to show us. Let me close the older tabs. Yes, we can see that it has generated all the required controls for all the properties whatever we have defined in the class. For id, this one is your integer, right? Then your name, whatever we can type, then the email, whatever we can type, then address, then your checkbox, right? And then for age is we can press over here, and for the date of birth is your calendar, right? So this way we can basically handle by using simply writing one line editor for model. So these are the different ways how we can handle in the application and how we can define the controls according to our need, right? Let me stop the application. And now let's suppose we want to post data from our UI that we have already discussed in the previous video, that how can we post the data from this view to the controller, right? So for that, so let me show you once more. Let me show you again. So for that, let's define one using block. I have already discussed in my last video why we are using this using block. HTML dot then begin form, right? Let's define the form name, any meaningful name. Let's suppose form 1, and inside that we can define this. Let's put this editor for model, the complete model, right? Because that is a, we can say, a kind of small form, right? And go to the for posting data from view to the controller, so we need to have one button also. So let's take one input type. We can define text. No, not exactly text. We want to submit our form, right? And let's take value. Let's suppose click me, right? And now close the tag. So this is a basically small form, right? On this form, we have taken one input submit button. But for posting data from view to the controller, there must be some one action method which is going to hold the data for that particular form, right? So let's create one more action method which will be of post type, right? And let's suppose we can write post data, and what kind of data we are expecting in the employer model. So it's going to hold the data in the employee object, right? So we need to create the employee object, and now we are going to make this action method of type http post, right? By applying this http post verb. So on this UI, when we are submitting the form after inserting all the values, so there must be any action method which is going to hold the data for that particular form, for this form, right? So that's why I have defined one action method which is of post type. That means this method is going to deal with the type of with the request type of post, right? So let's put a breakpoint, and I'm running the application. So let's see. So it will take some time. Let me close the last one. Yeah, we can see over here. Okay, the control is not coming here. Let me check why it is happening. Okay, okay, remove this line. Now reload the page again. Okay, so let me tell you one more thing. Uh, Let me tell you one more new thing. For posting data from view to the controller, right? So inside the controller, we have already defined the action method and we have make this action method of type post, right? So we need to tell the application. So if we are expecting, if we check the override method of this begin form, we can check that it is expecting action name, then controller name, and we have other overridden methods for this and the form method type, right? So in the action name, let's copy the action name post data. So this is the other way I'm telling to you. Then we can define the controller name. Controller name is your home, and then we need to define the third parameter is expecting form method. We need to define the what type of request it is going to accept, get or post. So it will be post because we are posting data from view to the controller. So now saving this file and now running in the browser. So let's see, and let me check whether we have placed the breakpoint in the action method. Yes, we have already placed a breakpoint. So let's check in the browser. It will render all the controls in the browser. Yes. So let's enter the field. Let's suppose we enter weapon, then we can enter abcd at the gmail.com, whatever we want, right? And then we can enter Delhi age employee check. Yes, age we can enter whatever we want. And then we need to pick a date from calendar and then clicking on the click me button, right? Now we can see our control has headed to our this action method post data. And let's check whether it's it is going to hold data whatever we have passed on the UI. Yes, so whatever we have passed, the date of birth, your email ID, name, address, age, right? So all the data is coming from the view to this employee object, right? So this is the way how we can send the data from view to the controller by using this approach also, right? So that is all for today, and stay tuned. In the upcoming videos we will be discussing in a very detail about data annotation and the validation and the custom type HTML helper also, right? So stay tuned and please subscribe and like my videos so that I can so that you can get all the latest notification whenever I upload my new videos. So thank you so much. Bye bye.